Okay. All right. So, Sanhedrin 7:10. We jump back into our continuing discussion of idolatry, one of the capital crimes, as we saw, and idolatry, as in everything else in Jewish law, has to be examined of what actually counts as idolatry, or in this particular case in 7:10, what counts as encouraging someone to commit idolatry, which is a separate crime than idolatry in and of itself. Kind of like the difference between committing an act of violence in American law or committing the act of inciting to violence in American law. They often go together. Sometimes the person who incites also commits violence. Sometimes the person who incites lets the mob do the dirty work. But both of them are crimes. So we're on inciting in 7:10. Good. Are you itching to read, Harriet? All right, go for it.
Number one who incites individuals to idolatry. This refers to an ordinary person who said, "There is an idol in such and such a place. It eats thus and it drinks thus, and it does good to those who worship it and harm to those who do not."
All right, so very straightforward. That's what incite means. It means you name the idol, you say how to worship it, and you tell the person that this is going to give them good or would give them bad if they didn't do that. Those are the elements for inciting, not just, hey, I saw a statue. It has to really be, this is a good and worthwhile activity. Great way to spend a Wednesday night.
Wow.
Onward.
Okay. For all who are liable to the death penalty according to the Torah, no witnesses are hidden to entrap them, excepting for this one.
Okay, so special rules. And idolatry throughout Jewish law is given special treatment. Idolatry is the only crime that you are considered to be liable for having seriously contemplated it, as opposed to acting upon it. Right? Every other crime you have to do it. If I think really hard, I want to murder someone, and I don't, God does not hold me accountable as though I murdered someone. The famous line from Jimmy Carter, when he lusted in his heart.
Right.
Right? No, according to Judaism, he lusted in his heart, not something to brag about, but also not something punishable either by earthly courts or by heavenly courts, as long as he didn't act on it. Idolatry? Idolatry is special because idolatry, as we already talked about, a priori, before you even begin to act, involves the denial of God. Right? You can't contemplate idolatry without simultaneously rejecting an understanding of God as God. Now, you may have a mistaken understanding of God.
Is that what you're looking for?
No, that is Leah, our new office administrator. She's going home after a busy day. What's that? No. She works with John Patrick. Yeah. So yes, it is possible, and indeed happened, that people would often think of God in a very limited kind of super friend version, and then idolatry is perfectly, I don't want to say perfectly, it is possible to be considered alongside of that version of God. If you think of God as being your invisible super buddy, then thinking of idols as being other forms of super buddies is normal for the brain to have. If you think of God properly as being the true God and being echad, being truly one, not just numerically but in essence, then idolatry just cannot be contemplated as an active action. So idolatry gets special treatment, and because of its effect upon everything else, due to that rejection of God as its fundamental premise, we are allowed to hide witnesses. If we know somebody is inciting, we know someone's going around doing this, we can try to catch them in the act. Whereas other crimes, other transgressions, we don't. We do not deliberately set up witnesses so we can go, aha, gotcha. We don't do that. Idolatry, if there's suspicion this is what the person's doing, then we will set it up, because otherwise they're just going to be going around going, buddy, idol, good stuff. And we'd never be able to catch them because, again, as we know, we need two witnesses and everything else that goes with it. Correct? Good. Onward.
If he said these things, drinks like this, come with me. If he said these things to two people, they themselves are witnesses against him, and he is brought to court and stoned.
Right? Meaning, if he's talking to a group or two or more, then they can turn around and say, he told us, and therefore he has witnesses against him.
Two witnesses.
Yeah. Two witnesses are the minimum.
But if he said these things to just one person, that person should reply, I have friends who'd like to do the same thing. Come and propose it to them too.
What a great idea. Let's have an idol party. And would you mind coming and giving that same speech in front of a group of friends? That's the entrapment. It's not entrapment per se, because he is already planning to encourage people to worship. It's just making sure that he meets that minimum threshold of witnesses so that he can be properly dealt with.
But if he was cunning and declined to speak before other people, witnesses are hidden behind a partition, while he who was originally incited says to him, oh, make your proposal again to me now in private.
Yeah, speak loudly and stand here next to this wall. This was not invented by 1950 sitcoms. Exactly. I'm sorry, what did you say? My flower couldn't hear you. My boutonniere was... Did you talk into the lamp a little? This was not invented recently. The idea that you would need to get the person to say this publicly with them not knowing that they were public has gone back for a couple thousand years. Onward.
When the inciter, the idol worshiper, repeats to him what he had already told him before, the other replies, how can we abandon our God in heaven to go and serve wood and stones?
All right, so in case you were feeling uneasy that they were going to pounce and stone this guy without having given him any chance for recanting and doing tshuva, it's built in. So someone offers to show you how to go worship an idol, you have to say, you know what, we can't leave God. How could we do that? Because...
Then if he retracts his statement, all is well.
Right, meaning even though he did it, right, make sure you understand that, even though he did say, hey buddy, want to go worship an idol with me, when you say, but we can't abandon God, and he goes, you're right, what am I doing? I'm an idiot, I can't abandon the God of Israel, work with my hands, all the things that we know about idols being foolish.
Yeah.
He's done, right?
It's okay.
We do not execute him.
But if he answers, it is our duty to worship idols, and it is okay for us to do, then the witnesses stationed behind the partition take him to court and have him stoned.
Right. So that's the way it is. But he is given a chance. Even though he has already incited, he is given a chance to retract before they will punish him.
I'm trying to get a feel for this. We are hundreds of years past the establishment of Judaism and Moses and everything else like that. These are people who were brought up in Jewish homes at the time.
Oh, absolutely.
So where is the influence for idol worship coming from?
The rest of the world and their neighbors, right? So it's a really important question, because we often project into the past a separation of Jews from the rest of the world that we imagine was what it was like in Eastern Europe during the time of Tevye and Fiddler on the Roof, the ghetto scene. But even when the ghettos existed, and even when the shtetls of Russia were our enclaves, we still had interaction with non-Jews. All the more so throughout the Middle Ages, and especially in antiquity. Israel was the crossroads of East and West and North and South. It is the land bridge link between Africa, Asia, and Europe. And people traveled in and out all the time, and they brought with them their cultures, their faiths, their products, and all sorts of other things that they were eager to share. And we have always been very susceptible to the lure of idolatry. All of humanity has, but we, despite having the Torah, despite being raised, as you say, with the idea that there is only one God and that God has no body, no form, and all of these things, and despite all the words of the prophets, which have been repeated hundreds and hundreds of years, bowing down to that statue, what's it going to hurt? Now, as I mentioned before, fundamentally, this is because of the flaw in the way most people understand God. If you truly understand God and truly have God, a conception of God, not understanding, but a conception of God that is clear and true, idols make no sense. It just don't work. But many people raised in the Jewish environment, raised even in an observant household by both modern or ancient standards, they do what they do because it's the culture, because it's what my parents told me to do. And when an opportunity presents itself that looks attractive, seems like it might benefit me in some way, even though I was raised differently, why not avail myself of it if I don't really understand what it is I am throwing out or what I am betraying? So yeah, idolatry has always been a problem. Now, it wasn't as big a problem by the age of the rabbis as it was during the age of the prophets. Very interesting archaeological, leading up to the destruction of the first temple of Jerusalem by the Babylonians, which we commemorate on Tisha B'Av in just a couple weeks. There are idols found in every archaeological site. So we came out of Egypt, we got the Torah, we settled the land, and we quickly adopted idolatry in almost every home that the archaeologists have dug in. They find these little statues and little shrines, and they know from the remains that idol worship was alive and well during the whole time that we lived in the land of Israel before the Babylonian exile. Now, we also know it's alive and well because the Bible tells us so. Because when you read the books of the prophets, in addition to our immorality between each other, our inhumanity to man, we are also constantly being accused of betraying God and worshiping the work of our own hands and all of these idols. So both from our own text as well as what we dig up, idolatry was always a problem. After the destruction, when we come back, that layer of dirt above, where we came back and we rebuilt and restored ourselves and all of that, idols really fall out of favor. They are not as common as they once were.
Well, in our early days, first place, the whole world around you is praying to gods that they can actually see. That's what everybody is doing. All of a sudden comes this idea that you're going to worship something in the sky that you can't see, that has no form, and it looks strange. It's weird. People like what they can see right in front of them. So you're trying to change an entire world, an entire Jewish world, when everything they see around them says, you're nuts. You mean I can't? You can just see how even you and I, back in those days, might have been tempted to look at something and please help me, please make me well, whatever, rather than, hello, are you up there someplace?
So, and it's very, very true. The generation who left Egypt saw more miracles and more of God's help and beneficence than anyone else before or since. And they already went to the golden calf. And they went to other idols and other things to worship that we see throughout the stories of going through the wilderness. So it is insidious, which is one of the reasons why halakha treats idolatry with a different set of standards. Can you speak into the lamppost for making sure that we can root this out? Because it is bad. And again, it's not just bad because it undermines the entire principle upon which Judaism is based, that God is one and formless and without body. But idolatry speaks to a fundamental power pyramid that puts humanity at the top rather than under God. It is a very corrupting and very naturally exploitative power structure, because idolatry says it's all in your hands. You give it the right stuff, you get good. You give it the bad stuff, you get bad. You can manipulate the spirits and gods in order to hit the theological jackpot. And that allows us to believe that we are in charge of each other, and it has perpetuated power structures that are exploitive and destructive throughout all of history. So idolatry isn't just you're on the wrong team. It really is a very negative influence on humanity. So that's why the kid gloves come off.
Yes. And then we have examples here of what someone might say to you that would be considered inciting you to idol worship. So he who incites individuals to idolatry is one who says, I will worship it, or I will go and worship, or let us go and worship, or I will sacrifice to it, or I will go and sacrifice. Let us go and sacrifice. I will burn incense. I will go and burn incense. Let us go and burn incense. Or I will make libations to it. I will go and make libations to it. Let us go and make libations. I will prostrate myself before it. I will go and prostrate myself. Let us go and prostrate ourselves. One who seduces a whole town to idolatry is one who says, let us go and serve idols.
right, which is more inclusive, a broader statement about all of us turning, not just, hey, watch me do this, or I'm going to do this, but we all need to participate in the worship. And that's a separate commandment in Deuteronomy, where this town enticer or town seducer is held up as being a prohibition. Make sense? Enough about idolatry? Maybe. Because we got another thing that people can do that are bad, but we got to make a differentiation. So we're on 7:11. No Slurpees.
A sorcerer, if he actually performs magic, is liable to death, but not if he merely creates illusions.
All right, so this is complicated. Let's get the example that Rabbi Akiva gives.
Okay. So Rabbi Akiva said in Reb Joshua's name, if two are gathering cucumbers by magic, one may be punished and the other exempt.
All right, so by the way, gathering cucumbers, at least according to most commentators, is the equivalent of saw a lady and a half pull a rabbit out of a hat. It must have been like the card trick. You know, I saw this guy last night and he was gathering cucumbers. It was great. It's some sort of standard trick name that was in the ancient world. I don't know what it is, but when you read that, just insert, rabbit out of a hat, saw a lady in half, pick a card, any card. And two different people can do the same trick, in quotes, and one is okay and one is not okay.
He who really gathers them is punished, while he who produces an illusion is exempt.
Okay, so what's the big question here?
If it's a true or illusion.
Right. Does that raise any question to you? Is the Mishnah saying magic's real?
Yeah. That's
Right?
very weird.
Is the Mishnah saying that it is possible for a sorcerer to actually work sorcery?
I mean, if I actually do this, but pull a cucumber out of the air,
Right.
and I actually pull a real cucumber, you'll kill me. But if it's really not a real cucumber, it's an illusion,
right,
and then I tricked you, then I'm okay.
Right. So it's basically like saying, if I pull a coin from behind your ear,
Yeah, right.
if that coin wasn't really in my hand,
Right.
and I just pulled it out of thin air, literally out of thin air, then I am a sorcerer and need to be killed. But if I had palmed it and I pull it out of your ear and it's like, oh, no, it's just sleight of hand, it's a trick, that's perfectly fine. So does that mean that the Mishnah is saying magic's real? Okay, so the commentators are, guess it, divided on this.
No surprise.
So indeed, there are some commentators throughout the ages that have said, yes, there are ways of manipulating magic, reality, sorcery, call it what you like, that can have real world effects. Now, I'm not on that camp. I'm personally in the other camp, which says no, but there are people who act as though what they are doing is truly manipulating magic, when in fact they know they are doing an illusion, but they are not trying to do an illusion for entertainment. They are trying to do an illusion to manipulate the crowd. Right? So just imagine the difference between David Copperfield, where he is in Vegas and he is doing, the flying tigers and whatever, just through entertainment, right? He's making a living just by giving people a great thrilling evening by wonder and illusionment, and it's amazing. And imagine someone else who gets up on a stage and says, if I am telling you the truth, this tiger will fly through the air, and the tiger flies through the air, and he says, and that proves that I have the power that, that God told me you should worship me, and I will grant you blessings, and all you have to do is obey me, and suddenly you become a cult leader. And on a personal note, I did know a family in San Diego when I was young who were taken in by someone who did exactly this. They were doing magic as a form of promulgating a cult of them, of the guy who was in charge of it. And they were saying, oh, he like teleported around the room and he could read your mind. And, it's all things that charlatans have done for a couple thousand years. Some of them do it in the marketplace for fun and a few coppers, and some of them do it to be evil and exploit. And many commentators have said it's that the Mishnah is talking about, that someone who uses this sleight of hand while preaching that this is proof of their ability, their authority, and that you need to follow them, that is a sorcerer. And the other person, he's just an entertainer. Make sense? Okay, well, if you're okay with that, let's get to the hard stuff. Chapter 8. Ben Soreru More, the rebellious son. This is a section in Deuteronomy. The citation is there on the page. It's chapter 21, where we hear about a rebellious son. And it is said that this rebellious son, if they persist, are taken and they are executed by the town. Now, anybody here have kids?
Yeah.
Anybody here at any point in their life really felt that their child was
Rebellious.
I was going to say disrespecting you. Possessed is maybe a little bit further. But you told them to go to the room, and then they said, "Why should I?" Or you told them to study hard, and they said, "I'm going to go play with my friends," and stormed out of the room. Is that what we're talking about? Are parents allowed to kill their kids just because they don't do what they say? Well, a surface reading of the Torah, a hyper-literal, just what do the words seem to imply to the casual reader, which remember, reading the Torah casually is an insult to the Torah, as well as what the Torah wants you to do and what the Torah thinks of you. Reading the Torah casually might lead you to believe that. And the rabbis are going to work very hard to help clarify this, to make sure that that is not what you think the Torah is actually saying. So I got to get that out there, that we're talking about a rebellious son, and the rabbis are going to try and guide us into understanding what the circumstances really are involved. And we'll go through these, and then we'll see. Well, tell me if you detect a pattern in how the rabbis are interpreting this.
Was that Mishnah 1?
Mishnah 1, yes, that tiny little bit in the middle of the page.
A wayward and rebellious son. At what age does he become liable to be stoned?
Okay, so what's the first step here?
Well, if a 6-year-old child doesn't listen to you, he's not old enough to understand.
All right.
When is he old enough?
A 6-month-old with colic.
Exactly. 6-month-old with colic, you do not take out and stone the kid. All right, boop, off the cliff you go. You stop being loud.
Yeah.
He didn't stop. The 2-year-old throws a tantrum in the supermarket. All right, we drag him out.
That's right.
All right, so we already know there's going to be a minimum age that the child has to reach before we are going to hold them accountable.
First, from the time that he produces 2 hairs until the beard is full, by which is meant the hair of the genitals, not that of the face, but the sages used euphemisms. For it says, if a man has a son,
Keep going.
a son, but not a daughter, a son, but not an adult man, the minor is exempt, since he does not come within the scope of the commandments.
Okay, so here's what the rabbis have done. They said this is the timeline of the kid's life. All right, at some point he is born. All right, that's time 0, and at some point he becomes what we now call a bar mitzvah. He is culpable and accountable for the commandments. All of this time, right, he's exempt. Because if you're not accountable to the commandments, then you're not accountable to the commandments. And how could you be punished, therefore, for having violated one of them, any of them? If you are under the age of bar mitzvah, you are exempt from the legal punishment. Doesn't mean you can't be chastised by your family. Doesn't mean you can't be sent to the bedroom without any supper. But as far as being dragged outside and stoned, not going to happen. What else did they add here? What about this side?
Okay, so he may even be older than bar mitzvah. Like if his voice hasn't changed yet, if he doesn't have the kind of hair that a man would have, but only the beginnings.
If he is a full adult, he is also not liable.
Right.
Because this law only applies to the son, which they are interpreting to mean child-ish.
Yeah, right.
So we've got 2 hairs to start and full hair. And as it said here, we're not talking about this. Okay? We're being euphemistic. How much time is involved here then?
Personal.
Yeah, it's personal first of all, but we're looking at like 6 months, maybe a year,
Yeah,
right? I mean,
right, 6 months, maybe a year.
from beginning with the idea that if your child disobeys you, they can be stoned, we have now moved it that if your son disobeys you, they can be stoned if they happen to be in exactly this window between being old enough to be held accountable, but not so old that they no longer count as what we normally would mean by saying my son.
Right.
Boom! Narrowed the window.
I don't think they wanted to stone very many kids.
And I think you're noticing exactly the pattern that I was talking about here,
Yes.
right? So in the first Mishnah alone, they have reduced the window and the scope of this law down to a very narrow band. Okay, let's see what else we can do with it. 8.2.
8.2. When does he become liable to be
Right.
stoned?
Because technically, there's something that could happen to this kid. We still have a 6 month, a year window when the kid is still potentially stonable. So now we need to figure out in this window, what do you have to do to earn a stoning? Is it just you throw a tantrum, or is there more specifics?
Once he has eaten a tatama
Mm-hmm.
of meat and drunk half a log of wine.
Which is a lot.
It is a lot.
Yeah, that's the general understanding. So in the section of Deuteronomy and Devarim, it talks about the kid eating and drinking a lot. And so they say, okay, if it says eating and drinking a lot, he's got to really eat and really drink a lot. Right? Keep going.
Rabbi Yosef said a mana of meat and a log of wine, which is even more.
Right. So they're still worried about quantity, but they're setting it up that in order to really be rebellious, it's not just about throwing a tantrum. You have to meet the precise criteria the Torah mentioned, which is to be a drunkard and a glutton. And that measure doesn't just mean you sipped off dad's cup. It means you were really getting yourself plastered and you were really gorging yourself. Keep going.
Or if he ate it in a company celebrating a religious act, sort of like idol worship.
No. An actual mitzvah.
Oh, an actual.
You're at a seudah. You're at a feast
okay.
for a brit milah,
Okay.
right? Or you're at a feast for a wedding.
So if he ate or drank that at celebrating a religious act, or at a gathering for the purpose of intercalating the month.
Yes. So remember, in the old days, we didn't do months based on that thing hanging off the wall. It was looking that thing up in the sky, and you would say, "Oh, we've had 12 months or 11 months rather, and if we go to the next month now, then we're going to have Passover too early. We better stick another Adar in here." You had to get together to make an agreement that you were going to stick another month in.
And if you happen to be drinking wine and eating meat at that thing,
It was a big occasion.
Okay. Or now, if he ate the second tithe in Jerusalem,
Right.
so
Another good reason to be eating a lot.
if he ate the carrion or terafot, the meat that was not slaughtered in a kosher fashion.
So it's not that that's good, but it doesn't count as really eating because it's treif. It's not kosher. Right? So it's not really food if it wasn't kosher. So yeah, he did gorge himself, but he didn't gorge himself on something that was permitted. Therefore, it doesn't count as gorging for the purposes of being defined as a wayward and rebellious son.
And so now we have even more unpermitted things that would be excused, such as things abominable or creeping things, or untithed produce, or the first tithe from which teruma had not been separated, or unredeemed second tithe, or unredeemed sacred food.
Right? These are all things that you shouldn't be eating.
Right.
But if he ate them, yes, he's in trouble for having eaten them, and they are things that he shouldn't be eating. But they don't add up to be part of that measurement of how much do you do to become a glutton. So he's off the hook.
Those don't count.
For being wayward and rebellious and being stoned, he still gets punished for the other stuff.
If his eating involved a religious act or a transgression, if he ate any food but did not eat meat or drank any wine, drank any drink but did not drink wine, he didn't eat meat or drink any drink, he didn't drink wine. Okay. He does not become a stubborn and rebellious son unless he eats meat and drinks wine, for it is written, "This our son is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice.
Listen.
He is a glutton and a drunkard."
Right? So we got the idea? So what have we now done? We made it even more precise down to you really have to be trying to earn this title.
You gotta be eating the kosher meat and drinking the wine at the same time.
Exactly. You've emptied your dad's kosher meat cellar and kosher wine cellar, and you're not doing it while they're simultaneously going on a big party, and you're only doing it during this window when you're, roughly 12, 13 or so. It's harder to do this than to become an Eagle Scout. Right? You really got to check all the boxes to have this, to meet this criteria.
Although there is no clear proof for this, there is at least a hint. As it says in Proverbs, do not be among wine drinkers, among gluttonous meat eaters of flesh.
Right? So in Proverbs, when we list what are bad characteristics, it is the gluttonous meat eaters and the drunkards with wine. So clearly, when we're talking about being a glutton and a drunkard, it must mean what proverb means, which is wine drunkard and meat glutton. Right? So if you gorge yourself on pasta, it's not okay, but you don't get executed.
I'm 12 and a half, and I commit a murder.
Mm-hmm.
I assume I'm exempt from punishment because I haven't been bar mitzvahed. If I'm 13 and a half
Mm-hmm.
and I commit murder, am I subject to the adult?
Yes, although to be precise under Jewish law, it's not a question of how old you are, it's a question of where you are in puberty.
Really?
In the old days, you became a bar mitzvah when the two hairs came. We don't check. Well, it was, families would know when the kid went through puberty, and the kid would know. I mean, it was a big deal. It was the kind of thing that he would say, "Hey, Dad, I'm getting hair and da 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 da," and then the family would know, and the community would know he is an adult now in the eyes of Judaism. He can be called for an aliyah, and he has all the responsibilities of being an adult Jew. So that used to be. It wasn't your birthday, which did I talk about this? No one kept track of their birthday.
No one kept track of birthdays.
Well, because lots and lots of babies didn't live a month, let alone a year. So why would you keep track of these things? If you look back through many of the annals of famous rabbis and people who we have histories of, we almost always know when they died, because when they died, they were famous. But when they were born, they were a nobody. Right? When they were born, they were just another baby. And so few babies lived to adulthood, let alone to fame. We just didn't keep track of them. Right? They were just born, and we hoped they lived, and we took care of them, and eventually they would show themselves to be viable, and then even better. But by that point, no one remembered what day they were born.
Well, even as I learned from my parents, I never had a birthday party. My kids feel so sorry for me because they didn't celebrate birthdays. My parents, who brought up in Europe, did not do that. And when I said I want a birthday party, I said, we have enough Jewish holidays, right?
Which is very true.
We don't need more.
Which is very true.
And so we did not keep track of birthdays historically. Right. It's just not a very Jewish thing to do.
Correct.
So you have to check when he looks like he's grown up enough, not arbitrarily when he turns 13, but he's still a little kid.
Exactly right. So yes, technically it triggers by the physical manifestation of puberty, not just by an age. And yes, again, we do not check in the modern world. We go off an average, and we hold the person responsible from the average time, rather than the precise individually measured time. Make sense? Good. Onward. We're not done yet.
You got more restrictions?
We got more restrictions.
Okay. If he stole from his
8.3, by the way, yes.
If he stole from his father and ate it on his father's property, or from strangers and ate it on the property of strangers, or from strangers and ate it on his father's property, he does not become a wayward, rebellious son until he steals from his father and eats on another's property.
All right, so stealing and eating in the same spot is more tempting and easier to do, right? It's the sneaking the cookie out of the cookie jar. I don't know whether you ever did this. I'm not asking for a confession. But if you did, I hope at some point you realized the best way to sneak candy or sneak a cookie was to open it and shove it in your mouth immediately, because the longer you had the cookie in your possession, the greater the chances of being caught, right? We were all clever kids, and we knew if you're going to sneak food, you go, just shove it in. To truly show disrespect and to truly show your rebelliousness, you take it and you go with it. I mean, that is some chutzpah, man. That is some chutzpah. It's like, see you later, Dad. I'm just taking out the cow for lunch. Like, what a...
But that's only if you take it from your father's house and take it out and eat it someplace else. Because if you go to your friend's house, steal a cookie, and bring it back to your father's house, that's okay.
Correct. And it is also less likely that that's going to become habitual, right? Stealing from someone else is much more dangerous.
You don't have that opportunity as often either.
Exactly. And it's also more generic theft as opposed to a deliberate act of rebelliousness against your family. So they are, again, narrowing it down even more. It's not just a question of eating the right amount of food and the right type of food. It has to be eaten, stolen from the right place and in the right place.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda said, until he steals from his father and mother.
Right, and this is going to be sort of repeated in the next Mishnah as well, because the Mishnah the Torah talks about his mother and father being involved in this whole process. Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda actually adds in and says, and he's got to steal from both of them. If he just sneaks it from dad, it doesn't matter because he's only broken one part of what the Torah talks about. He's got to do it against them both.
It sounds like they're trying very hard not to punish this young man.
Let's replace the word punish with the more precise word.
Stone.
Thank you.
Yes.
Right. They're trying very hard not to stone him, right? Not to execute him.
Right.
All right, 8-4.
8-4. If his father wants to have him punished, but not his mother, or his father does not want to have him punished, but his mother does, he is not treated as a wayward and rebellious son unless they both desire it.
Okay, so yeah, exactly. Well, it says his mother and his father have to call him this. They have to agree, essentially. But that's the implicit understanding of the Torah, and they are making it explicit that you need agreement between the parents.
I also like that very much because it shows tremendous respect for the woman also. It's not just the father said, the man of the household speaks and it's done. You have to get her to approve as well.
And again, what are we approving here? His execution. So
at least they ask her.
At least they ask her. And now we're going to get something that may not sound quite so egalitarian, but go ahead and read.
Rabbi Judah said, if his mother is not fit for his father, he does not become a wayward and rebellious son.
Okay, so it doesn't mean that he wouldn't become wayward and rebellious in the generic sense. It means he doesn't become wayward and rebellious in the technical, you're going to be executed sense. What do they mean by fit? Well, there's a couple different versions in the commentaries of what this can mean. One is that this is somebody the father should not have married in the first place. The most famous example would be if you are a Kohen and you marry somebody who is a divorcee, right? Or somebody who is a convert. According to the Torah, Kohanim are not allowed to marry those people, but if they do, the marriage is still binding. But the children do not become Kohanim. So they have this change in the family lineage by the father marrying in somebody that was not fit to be appropriate, exactly. So that's one explanation. And then you would say, well, the child cannot be held accountable because he's already been brought up in a disrupted setting. Another question of fit is the more casual definition of fit, that this was not a good match. This was a husband and wife who were not good together from the first place, and you shouldn't be surprised that the kid has some issues here. And indeed, in the section in the Torah in which this is taken, this comes at the end of a sequence of 3 seemingly disconnected episodes or mitzvot. One of them is the issue of when you can take a woman captive on the battlefield and bring her home, and what you have to do to then have her become part of your family. And then the idea that when you have children born from multiple wives, that the eldest born, even if it's from the wife you don't love as much as the other wife, inherits the elder's portion, meaning that doesn't matter which wife is your favorite, it's the order of birth that's all that matters. And then after that, the wayward and rebellious son crops up. It doesn't take a rocket science rabbi for the Midrash to say, so you take a woman captive and you force her to be your wife, and then you decide you don't like her and you remarry. What's that going to do to the kids that were born from that first wife that was a captive? Right? I mean, they're going to grow up so messed up and probably not liking dad all that much in all of this turmoil. Can we execute the kid for rebelling against that? And the answer is no, you can't. So we're down to like very little. Okay, let's keep going though, because we're not done yet.
If one of them, either his father or his mother, had a hand cut off, or was lame, mute, blind, or deaf, he cannot become a wayward and rebellious son, because it says, his father and mother shall take hold of him, but not those with hands cut
You
off,
can't take hold of him if your hand's missing.
and bring him out, but not lame parents.
They're not walking.
And they shall say, but not mute parents, this is our son, not blind parents.
How can they be? How can they point to their son when they're blind?
He will obey our voice.
He will not.
Oh, I'm sorry. He will not obey our voice, not deaf parents.
How do they know what he says?
So all of a sudden we're being literal.
Being very
Shkoch, exactly.
Right.
So the casual reading of the original text
Right.
made it sound like you were executing kids left, right, and center, or at least you had permission to execute kids left, right, and center. The rabbinic reading has gone through a mix of both literal, like we're seeing here, word by word precision, to exclude whole ranges of people from being eligible for executing their children, to the more interpretive reading of the text in order to also exclude a whole range of people from being eligible for this execution. So it seems that the rabbis are using not a I'm literal or not literal methodology. What they are reading is, how do we reconcile this understanding of how we treat our children and how our communities work with everything else we know about God from every other part of the Torah? Right? And that's a very important concept to hold on to. It's not just that the rabbis, as some people might put it, they're uncomfortable with this. Now, the rabbis are fine being uncomfortable with stuff, and if they really believe that the interpretation is what God wants, it doesn't matter what modern people think, it doesn't matter what ancient people think, that is what the rabbis will go for. But they have a duty and they have a belief that every part of Torah fits every other part of Torah. And if other parts of Torah seem to be full of compassion and mercy and understanding and providing for all of this judicial process, the cleaners, for everything else, then this section, which might on the casual read seem to be going in the face of that, has to be interpreted with that in mind as well. And so they're not deliberately trying to be literal or non-literal. They're not deliberately trying to be lenient or non or strict. They are trying to match this with every other piece of the Torah. And that is one of the brilliant things about the rabbinic endeavor, about the oral Torah, is they don't just think there's mitzvah here, mitzvah there, mitzvah here. They think this and this and this and this and that and everything else in between are all interconnected, and I can't understand this mitzvah without also understanding all the others. And that builds a natural balance so that no one mitzvah is just weird off in its own lunatic interpretation. Make sense? Yeah, that's why we call them the sages. Okay, onward.
Now, if as a result of all of that, what you just wrote on the board, mitzvahs, you still have a wayward child, he is warned in the presence of three and beaten.
Flogged, which was a standard practice back then for adults that had committed crimes. Right? Quack, quack.
If he transgresses again after this, he is tried by a court of 23.
Right? That's because it's subject to capital punishment, so you need to have the larger court. You can't just have the small baked in.
He cannot be sentenced to stoning unless the first three are present, because it said, this our son, implying this one who was whipped in your presence. If the rebellious son fled before his trial was completed, and then his pubic hair grew in fully, he's free. But if he fled after the trial was completed, and then his pubic hair grew in fully, he remains liable.
Okay.
There's a lot of ifs.
There's a lot of ifs there. And again, the ifs tend to come down on the side that this is very narrowly construed. He gets a warning, and and then he is for having done it in the first place, and flogged for having done what he did, and then he has to repeat, and that repeat has to be done. The trial has to be done with the people who were present at the first one. So they have to be very clear this is the same kid doing the same thing as he was warned against doing. And if all of that is done, but the trial's not complete, and he reaches maturity, then he's out of the window. And now you can't execute him. You can still kick him out of the house, but you can't execute him. And you can still flog him. Like I said, flogging was a standard practice for many, many things. Some other day we'll sit down and we'll discuss whether or not flogging or years in prison, which is the worst punishment. Worse in terms of the effect on the criminal, and worse in terms of punishes them in a way that makes the society feel better. But that's a whole much longer conversation. 8.5.
8.5. First is, a wayward and rebellious son is judged on account of his outcome. Let him die innocent, and let him not die guilty.
All right. So now we are getting into a realm that's going to be really complicated and very fraught with peril and perhaps misinterpretation. He is judged on account of his outcome. Let him die innocent, and let him not die guilty. What are we saying here? We're saying, look at where he is today. A young man, this narrow window, who would do exactly all of this as we've laid out. Where's he going to be in 10 years? And what litter of bodies and crimes will he leave behind if this is where he is today? Right? It's the classic example of if you had a time machine and you could go back and you met 12-year-old Hitler, would you kill him? Right? If you knew the future, would you kill him to prevent that from happening? But look at what they're trying to prevent here. Who is being benefited by his execution at this point? He is, the son. I have to kill you now to save you and your soul from the crimes you will commit in the future. And I can see around the table that you begin to see why this is a dangerous notion, right? The idea of killing someone to save them from themselves, right? We had to kill you in order to save your immortal soul, has been used throughout history in many, many horrific ways. This line by itself, without everything we did before it, would be much more difficult to swallow. But when you see how precisely this person had to act and what lengths the rabbis went to narrow it down, you can begin to understand what they're looking at here. And they also have to explain, quite honestly, why would the kid be executed? Because he ate too much and drank too much? How is that a capital offense? And again, the rabbis are looking at this one mitzvah, and they're looking at all the other examples of capital crimes and saying, one of these things is not like the other. This is not like murder. It's not even close. And it's not like idolatry. I mean, he ate too much, he drank too much. Why are we executing him? And this is the answer they came up with. And again, notice that they are trying to frame it compassionately. We're not executing this very, very precise case because we don't like him or because he was mean to his parents. We're doing it because he has clearly demonstrated the path that he is on, and better for him that he bows out of the world in the first act rather than coming back after intermission and doing all sorts of horrible things. We're going to come back to this idea because when we get to the notion of when you are allowed to kill someone to prevent them from sinning, we will come into this in much more detail.
For the death of the wicked,
Bless you.
the death of the wicked benefits themselves and the world, and the death of the righteous injures themselves and the world.
Right? The world's better off without the wicked. I think that's fairly self-explanatory. And the wicked are better off without being in the world because they no longer can increase their badness. Right? They can't amass any more guilt if they have been removed from the world and no longer able to act in it. So it's good for them, good for the world, see ya. As opposed to the righteous, for the world benefits every day a righteous person gets to live, and the righteous person benefits for every day they get to live. They will make good use of it, and they will continue to amass the goodness that they have performed in this world. And now, as long as we're on the topic of bad for them, good for them, let's do a little aside.
Wine and sleep of the wicked benefits themselves and the world. Of the righteous injure themselves and the world.
All right, so lots of different ways to interpret what these four things that are about to come in. So I'll give you a couple versions. Wine and sleep benefit them because when they are unconscious, they're not doing stuff, right? A sleeping villain is a good villain. A passed out drunk villain is a good villain. He's not doing anything while he's like that. So if you can get them to sleep and drink, that's great. As opposed to the righteous, for whom when they miss sleep, or rather when they are sleeping, they are missing out on doing things they could otherwise be doing so good. And the same thing for drinking too much, it removes them from the path that they should be on. So too,
the scattering of the wicked benefits themselves and the world.
It's good to spread the wicked people around. You don't want to put them all together. It's just, that's bad.
Right, make them isolated.
Yeah, don't make a den of thieves.
Of the righteous, scattering the righteous injures themselves and the world.
As we as a Jewish people are able to attest to very clearly, right? Not being able to be together with your community and with other righteous people is very hard on life.
Right.
Keep going.
The assembling of the wicked injures themselves and the world.
Fairly straightforward.
The assembling of the righteous benefits themselves and the world.
Mm-hmm.
The tranquility of the wicked injures themselves and the world. The tranquility of the righteous benefits themselves and the world.
All right, so this is a little bit, you have to understand what tranquility is talking about here. It means when the wicked are not being harassed, it's good, it is bad for them because it lets them be bad, right? So imagine you got two people, right? Two farmers. One of them is evil and one of them is righteous, as if anyone was ever purely, but just imagine, cartoon characters, the white hat, black hat farmers. And both of them are suffering horrible, horrible droughts and blights on their crops. And so every day they are out there, they are working and weeding and trying to fight and scrape in order to keep their crops alive. How much bad is the wicked person getting up to? Not much. He's too busy struggling to survive. And so too the good person. How much good is he getting up to? Not so much. He's too busy struggling to survive. Now everything turns around. There is a wonderful bounty and harvest and cornucopia and all of that good stuff. Now the wicked person has lots of free time, and so does the righteous person. What's the wicked person going to do with his free time? Wicked stuff. What's the righteous person going to do with his free time? Righteous stuff. So that's what they are talking about when they say tranquility in that final section. That sometimes, what's the phrase? Idle hands are the devil's workshop. Thank you. Right? Sometimes staying busy is a really good way to keep people from doing bad things. And freeing up some people is a really good way to give them an opportunity to do good things. And it's finding the right balance, the right mix, and the right things, and the right people. That's the tricky bit. Okay? Okay. And that's it for tonight. Because we are going to move into the topic of what we do with thieves. Because sometimes a thief can be killed, sometimes they can't. Judaism does not have a carte blanche, my home is my castle doctrine. You are not allowed to kill every intruder. You are only allowed to kill intruders under certain circumstances. You're allowed to stop them, but not with lethal force, except for certain circumstances. But you'll have to stay tuned for next week for that one. All right. All right. Good stuff.